Been thinking about how we spend our time. If we are going to change the trajectory of the nation, if we are going to change from the trajectory of political power moving in a right-wing direction, certainly since 1980, some would argue since Brown versus Board of Education, moving in a regressive direction if we adopt Stella's term instead of conservative, because we've had so many callers who have pointed out the weakness of the word, the incorrectness, the inaccuracy of the word conservative as it is currently applied. That if we commit ourselves to not only being observers to what's happening in the nation, but to being activists, to being agents of change, to bending the arc of history towards justice, or the arc of the moral universe, if you prefer. What should we do? How should we focus our attention? So much of the attention of our social media feeds and of our radio and of our TV, of this program, is about the current occupant of the White House. But he did not put himself there. The condition that begat the current Congress did not happen in a year or two. It was a decades-long movement. When there was a movement to change school boards funded by the right-wing movement, using Christianity as a cover, it was a recognition that eventually you could build power, that those activists who were working on school board races could work on legislative races, and those legislative race activists could work on congressional races. And if they were doing that, of course they would vote for the president. They're not going to leave that part of the ballot blank. But what has been learned is that if you only focus the top of the ballot, sometimes people say, I came here to vote against Trump. I checked that box, and I can go home. I don't need to pay attention to who's running for Congress or the legislature or the U.S. Senate or county judge or city council person or dog catcher, if they elected that any further. But I assure you, if the family members of the candidate for dog catcher came to vote, they'd fill out the rest of the ballot. They'd only skip the stuff they really couldn't figure out. So what should we focus upon? And part of the challenge is if you say, hey, everybody, just focus local. What do you mean? There's a lot of local. My local's different than their local. So you end up on a national program not being able to tell anybody exactly what might be useful for them to do. That's why we welcome calls and say, hey, well, here's something we're working on that is useful. But what I did was I spent some time over the weekend at least dividing the country into a few categories. At least figuring out that, okay, I can't just say, everybody go work on your state legislative race. Oh, go work with your my state legislative race. I live in a Democratic district. The Democrat's going to win. Okay, I'll spend time for this shade of Democrat versus that shade of Democrat. Was that going to help? Well, maybe. If I say, everybody go work on campaign finance reforms, well, we can't pass that where I am. Or we already have a pretty good campaign finance system where I am. It makes it hard to generalize. And because it's hard to generalize, and people with national programs want to build their national audience, they don't want anything that only speaks to 8% of their audience or 22% of their audience or 3% of their audience. So what impacts all of you? I don't know, the Iran deal. Trump saying some racist stuff. And then, instead of working in the ways where you might have the most impact, not just sending another $3 to Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, but figuring out how you could have significant impact on the overall trajectory of democracy in the particular opportunity that's presented near you. And then we continue to spin. We continue to, win or lose a presidential race. But now you have 30 states that are fully controlled by Republican legislatures. You have a Supreme Court that is the most right-wing Supreme Court, the most regressive Supreme Court, thank you, Stella, since the Lochner era, since the turn of the last century, since the run-up to the Great Depression. And yes, I use that analogy very much on purpose, that reference. So what I did is I spent some time this weekend at least putting it in some categories. And I figured, well, if you live in a blue state, what could you do? Let's start with a blue state. If you live in a blue state, what could you do? I think if you live in a blue state, I would focus on democracy. There's other things you could do, but I would focus on democracy. I would make sure that in that state, you had a system of voting that allowed everybody to vote, that you worked on voter access. We had a caller last week that pushed this, that you pushed for automatic voter registration plus vote by mail with a paper record. We go big on voter access. Drape yourself, drench yourself in democracy. You could also advocate for publicly financed elections. Maybe a little harder at the state level because states have had their budgets attacked so much, but it's still doable. And if you can't get it done in this economy, you're not going to get it done in the middle of a recession. And of course, make sure your legislature is blue. Those are some blue state things to do. Now let's say you live in a blue city. Lots of you live in blue cities. What could you do? Here's where I'm going to say publicly financed elections. A 6-to-1 match like New York City, or democracy vouchers like Seattle. Grow real local candidates. Remove a barrier to running. A barrier for young people, a barrier to middle-class people, a barrier to busy people, a barrier to people of color, a barrier to people without a lot of rich friends, a barrier to people who don't want to sell themselves out to corporate lobbyists. Build trust in the process. Build movements and networks that aren't dependent on corporate lobbyists. So, hey, can I get an endorsement? That person can say, oh, should I endorse that candidate? Well, they're not really with my corporate lobby buddies. But if they came up in a people-based movement that wasn't funded by corporate lobbyists, then all of a sudden they say, yeah, I'll endorse you. And you can start building an apparatus, a pro-people apparatus. And we can do that in blue cities all across the country. That could happen in 50 cities in America. And if that happened in 50 cities in America, we would be a couple decades away from a fully transformed America. People say, oh, that's too slow. Let me tell you, think about how long it's going to take to change the Supreme Court. There will be real world impact of doing that. You'll have impact on an immediate term. You'll have impact on housing. Stuff in my city just happened with more people-based candidates. They've been working hard on access to housing. You'll have real impacts in real lives in blue cities if you have people-based movements. But it will also have big long-term benefit, both short-term and long-term benefit. But what happens? What happens if you work, if you live, if you activate, if you engage in a purple state? What do I do then? I can't do all this fluffy-hearted stuff you're talking about. Jeff, I live in Michigan. I live in Pennsylvania. I live in Wisconsin. I live in a place where, well, there are things for you too. Win your legislature. Adopt a legislative district. Figure out where the close legislative districts are and volunteer for that person, donate to that person, build minor movements to help that person. That's how we got the bus project started. Bus Project's now changing its name. Now it's the Alliance for Youth Action something or other, has headquarters in 11 states, but has started out recognizing that young people could have a significant impact on local legislative races. So can you. Another thing you can do, like Michigan did, nonpartisan redistricting. Nonpartisan redistricting to say, and if you do this, if this happens only in blue states and doesn't happen in red states, well, all that'll happen is that you'll end up sending more Republicans to Congress. But Eric Holder's work to try to purify a little bit the districting process is noble work. And in purple states, in states where aptly drawn districts will create aptly drawn, will send representatives. That is both moral and strategic. You can also, in those states, work on the national popular vote. It might give it a chance. It's winning in the blue states. If you can get national popular vote done in a purple state, well, then we're going to have a popular vote in the country if that happens in the purple states. Win the legislature, nonpartisan redistricting, and national popular vote. That's the purple state map. We got 1 minute left, but don't worry. But Jeff, I live in a red state. I live in Alabama. I live in North Carolina. Well, you're kind of a swing state now. I live in South Carolina. I live in Ohio, which is not nearly as much of a blue state as it used to be, not even much as a purple state. Well, Ohio, I'm going to still say go yourself in the purple direction. Look at your legislature. Look at your nonpartisan redistricting. But if you're in just a really red state, nonpartisan gerrymandering if you can, but also you live in a purple city, change the party structure. Advocate for a different way to elect folks. Because I recognize in some places in this country, it's just a really long way to remind, hey, wait a minute, Democrats used to win here. I know you've been listening to Limbaugh and watching Fox News for a long time, and some right-wing Christian preacher who somehow pretends that God is for big military and big business because they didn't read the New Testament. Might be a bridge too far to say vote Democrat, but it might not be a bridge too far to say, hey, let's have a system that's not quite so partisan. Let's have a system that allows for other parties to have voices, and then somebody can run under Independent or run under Working Families Party, and they can still be pro-democracy. They don't have to be a Democrat. But they can be pro-democracy, they can be pro-human, they can be pro-climate, they can be pro-middle class.